Yahweh, the god of the largest religions today, originated as the god of Judaism. Judaism is the oldest of the Abrahamic religions, and it is from Judaism that Christianity and Islam emerged. But where did Judaism come from? This exposé touches on a number of key points that addresses the Hebrew language, Yahweh, angels, and the origins of the religion that the ancient Hebrews practiced, which also has a direct impact on Christianity and Islam. Let's begin with the Hebrew language, by which Judaism was passed down through the ages. Hebrew, like most languages, evolved over time by borrowing from other languages. We need to briefly go over the history of a few ancient languages, as this will be important later. The oldest written form of Hebrew is called Paleo-Hebrew, dating to around 1000 BC. But this was entirely replaced by Old Aramaic around 800 BC. Both of these languages are a derivative of Phoenician, an older language dating to 1200 BC. Phoenician ultimately stems from Egyptian hieroglyphs. Egyptian hieroglyphs, in turn, was derived from Sumerian pictographs called Proto-Cuneiform, before the Babylonians and the Akkadians simplified it into the wedge-shaped cuneiform that was easier to write. Cuneiform was originally designed for writing on clay tablets, but around 1200 BC, the Phoenicians invented a simplified script of repeating letters to represent consonants, designed to be written on paper. This was a more efficient method of writing, and Phoenician script was adopted and adapted by countless cultures, such as the Greeks, Romans, Hebrews, Arabs, Moabs, pretty much all of the Mediterranean region and the entirety of the ancient Near East. The written Hebrew that we know of today, called Square Hebrew, was created around 100 BC. It is a derivative of Middle Aramaic. Like the briefly used Paleo-Hebrew, Aramaic is itself a derivative of Phoenician, but went through changes as it was passed around the ancient Near East to tie all of the local Semitic dialects together into a bridge language. Hebrew is not a holy script that suddenly popped into existence one day. It was derived from other older languages. As for the religion of Judaism, the oldest translations of the Hebrew scriptures available is the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures that was completed by 132 BC. The original older Hebrew reference texts have been lost. The Dead Sea Scrolls are even older than the Septuagint, the oldest documents dating to 408 BC, but averaging 200 to 300 BC. The Hebrew scriptures referenced throughout this discourse, however, is the Masoretic texts, the most authoritative Hebrew scriptures that Orthodox Jewish rabbis study. Most Western translations of the Bible ultimately stem from the Masoretic texts, especially for the Old Testament, including the King James Version of the Bible. Any differences between the Masoretic texts, the Septuagint, and the Dead Sea Scrolls in this presentation will be noted. Further, there are extra-biblical sources which align with parts of the biblical narrative by which we can pin exact dates, or in some cases give narrow estimates for when these stories were written. For example, the oldest reference in the world that mentions the name Yahweh is traced back to 840 BC on a large stone tablet called the Mesha Stela, containing a single reference where King Mesha took the vessels of Yahweh from the temple and presented them before Chemosh, the Moabite national deity. There is a tendency in the religious community to think of these ancient biblical events in a hazy manner regarding the dates, as if this was prehistoric times. This was the Bronze Age, for which we have extensive, detailed records from all over these regions, going back over 2,000 years before the first books of the Bible were written. The story of the biblical exodus of the Israelites from Egypt is typically placed around 1250 or 1450 BC, 200 to 400 years before the existence of Paleo-Hebrew. So in what language were the scriptures and the Ten Commandments written? More importantly, we have not yet found any archaeological evidence supporting that a sizable population of Hebrews were ever slaves in Egypt. And in fact, the land of Canaan that the Bible says was conquered to establish the land of Israel was actually a part of Egypt from at least the 17th century BC to 1069 BC. In other words, the Hebrews were supposedly escaping Egypt by going into Egypt. And they would not be fighting Canaanites to establish Israel, they would have fought Egyptians. Regardless, if the Exodus took place, this biblical story is placed in the Bronze Age. This was when the Trojan War was going on, as well as the legendary Battle of Kadesh between the Egyptians and the Hittites. King Tut is from this era as well, and little before King Tut was Hatshepsut, the first female pharaoh of Egypt. This time period was a golden age of writing, trade, and architecture. These are not prehistoric times. Paleo-Hebrew was developed in 1000 BC, and all Jewish records appear well after this date. In fact, archaeological references suggesting the existence of the Hebrew scriptures only began to appear around 600 BC during the Babylonian captivity. However, due to the fact that other records mention King Ahab and King Omri, scholars can safely assume that some form of the oldest biblical scriptures date to this period at the latest. This is also the period when Paleo-Hebrew was being used, before Israel adopted Old Aramaic. Now, the name Yahweh itself is spelled using 4 consonants in the Hebrew language, YHVH or YHWH. V and W are the same letter in Hebrew. However, the word Yahweh itself is neither Hebrew nor Canaanite. It's Babylonian, around 1,000 years older than the Hebrew language or the time period of Moses. The word Yahweh occurs in Old Babylonian and early Old Babylonian texts, which is a third-person verb, meaning he was present. This correlates with Yahweh's self-description as I am that I am, found in Exodus 3:14 when Moses is talking to the burning bush. The Babylonian word Yahweh is a common verb describing an action, as in, Bob made himself present for the banquet. This would be rendered Bob Yahweh for the banquet. Yahweh can also carry the meaning to create, as in, the potter Yahweh the vase, or the potter made present or created the vase. Using this verb as a noun would essentially mean creator and the presence, which is how this Babylonian loanword is used in the Bible. Of note are names in Mesopotamia, particularly from the Mari texts of ancient Syria dating to 1800 BC, where the title Yahweh is sometimes attached to the names of other gods, kind of like a surname. There is also mention of a place name called Yahu, found in 13th century BC Egyptian records, which reads, Yahu in the land of the Shasu nomads. The Shasu were nomads that lived in Midian by the Red Sea. Yahu, spelled YHW, is a toponym, or the name of a stretch of land in Midian. Most ancient Semitic languages are abjads, or consonant-only languages, though cuneiform is a noteworthy exception. When you remove the vowels from the Babylonian word Yahweh and carry it across to other languages, you end up with either YHW or YHWH. Here we see how the word Yahweh started in Babylon in the 24th century BC, was carried west to Mari by the 19th century BC, and south to Midian by the 13th century BC. This is a clear historical path how Yahweh went from Babylon to Canaan and beyond. Exodus 6:2 marks the beginning where we see YHWH, or Yahweh, routinely used as a name. Before this, as well as peppered throughout subsequent scriptures, we instead see the word Elohim used to describe the divine creator. Elohim is a common word for Yahweh, but it means gods. Elohim is the plural form of the word El or Eloah, both of which mean God in the singular. But there is something that must be understood about the Hebrew language. Elohim can be used as either singular or plural, usually depending on the verb or preposition next to it. It's the equivalent of saying, grasshoppers is jumping. The plural form grasshoppers may be used, but the verb is singular, indicating one grasshopper. Here is an example from the Bible, Genesis 1:1. Bereshit bara Elohim, et hashashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning Elohim created the heavens and the earth. The Hebrew verb bara, which means created, is a singular verb. So in this instance, the plural noun Elohim, gods, is understood to be singular, indicating one God. But it is not always like this. There are countless instances where plural verbs and pluralized grammar support a truly plural meaning of the gods, such as Genesis 1:26, which uses the plural verb make. The rest of the grammar supports the plural reading as well, meaning multiple gods are being referenced. Ve'omer Elohim na'asa adam betzalmenu kidmutanu. Then Elohim, the gods, said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. This entire sentence is one of many that is filled with plural words and pluralized grammar, which suggests the existence of a pantheon of gods. But the best example in the Bible of the grammatical differences in the usage of Elohim is Psalms 82:1. Elohim nitzaf ba'adatel, bekarev Elohim yishpot. Elohim is standing in the assembly of El. Among Elohim he judges. The first use of the Elohim is singular, referring to one God, because the singular verb nitzav, or is standing, is being used. The second part of this verse, however, clearly references a pantheon of gods, because the preposition among, or bekrev, is used. Elohim, or God, is standing in the assembly of God. Among the gods he judges. This shows that Yahweh is the head of a pantheon, and this is supported further in verse 6 of the same chapter where God is speaking to his congregation. Ani amarti Elohim, atem uveni elyon kulachem. I said, you are gods, and sons of Elyon are all of you. There are many references like this, suggesting that Yahweh is the head of a pantheon, rather than the one and only God. We see this most often with the phrase Bnei Elohim, which is translated as sons of the gods. This is usually explained as Yahweh's high council of angels, but that is merely an assumption. The word malach, or angel, is a common word used in the Bible, but it is never used as a reference to the Elohim nor Bnei Elohim. Angel means messenger, and does not always refer to a spirit. This word describes a function, not a type of being. In fact, the malachim, or angels, is equally used to describe flesh and blood human messengers throughout the scriptures. Job 1:14 and 15 says, There came a messenger unto Job and said, The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans made a raid and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. The word messenger here in Hebrew is malach, or angel, and the context describes a human messenger. 1 Samuel 16:19 says, Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse, and said, Send me David thy son, who is with the sheep. Here, the word malachim is used. King Saul sent a number of angels to go retrieve the shepherd boy David. This is how the word angel is used in the Hebrew Scriptures. It's even the title of one of the books of the Bible, the book of Malachi, which translates as the book of my messenger, or the book of my angel, referring to the human prophet who wrote it. All prophets are considered malachim, or angels. In a more modern sense, every single post office worker is literally an angel. Think about that next time someone goes postal. Bloody angels. However, neither the Elohim nor Beni Elohim of the divine council of Yahweh are ever called malachim, or angels, in the scriptures. Calling the Beni Elohim angels is pure conjecture that has been handed down through the temples, churches, and mosques. Psalms 89, 6-9 gives a clear description of what the Elohim and the Beni Elohim are. The heavens shall praise thy wonders, Yahweh, thy faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies is comparable unto Yahweh? Who is like Yahweh among the sons of the gods? El, God who is feared in the great council of the holy ones, and is revered by all who are around him. Yahweh, God of hosts, who is mighty like unto thee, O Lord? Thy faithfulness surrounds thee. Again and again we see references to a pantheon of gods that Yahweh rules. You have to be able to read Hebrew yourself to truly understand what is written. Many translators often translate Beni Elohim as sons of rulers, sons of Israel, or sons of Seth, rather than use the correct phrase, sons of the gods, presumably to avoid the potentially difficult questions that naturally arise. When we look in other documents slightly older than the Bible, Beni Elohim has an exact parallel in Ugaritic and Phoenician texts, which is the older Semitic languages where Hebrew actually came from, referring to the Council of the Gods. Even Jewish scholars study the Ugaritic texts to understand the meaning of various passages of the Bible due to cultural meanings of the time and turns of phrase. The Ugaritic text uses the phrase Beni Elim, which means sons of the gods, and describes them as the assembly of the sons of the gods. Council of the gods and sons of the gods are used interchangeably in all ancient Semitic languages. This was a common theme throughout the ancient Near East that ultimately traces back to the land of Sumer and Babylon. This is the land that features the city of Ur, which is where Abraham came from. The Council of the Gods in Sumer were called the Anunnaki. Anunnaki means children of Anu. Anu was the top ruling deity in the ancient Mesopotamian religion, who parallels Yahweh, and his children sat on the council. If you said Council of Gods or Sons of the Gods in any Semitic language, including Hebrew and Aramaic, back then, they all knew that you were referring to the Anunnaki, or the Anunnaki known by a local name. That's what they heard when you use these phrases. However, while today's Judaism is vehemently monotheistic, they weren't always this way. Originally, they were henotheists rather than monotheists. Henotheism acknowledges the existence of many gods, but emphasizes that only one God is actually worthy of worship. The other gods are subservient to the central god. Henotheism is the middle step between polytheism and true monotheism. Prior to the school of thought known as Rabbinical Judaism, there existed Second Temple Judaism and various schools of Hellenistic Judaism. These iterations of Judaism, as well as the original religion of Yahweh as it was practiced in ancient Israel and Judah, prior to the Babylonian captivity, were henotheistic, not monotheistic, as evidenced by Psalms 82 and 89, as well as the first of the Ten Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Lo yeye lecha Elohim acherim al paneah. The literal translation is, no will be to you, Elohim, others over. When you apply the correct grammar and grammatical inflection so it makes sense to us, it says, to you, no others will be over Elohim. This is a broad statement that addresses ranking of value. Nothing is to come first above Elohim. Not money, not a spouse, not children, not lesser gods, nothing. Yahweh is supposed to be first and most important. Everything that comes after is fine. Just as it is okay to have money or a spouse, so too acknowledging other gods is fine, as long as those gods are considered second class. It does not say, "You shall have no other gods, for no others exist." It says, "To you no others will be over or before Elohim." This is the very definition of henotheism. It is only in later history that a more vicious policy was adopted concerning other gods. Most notably, it was the hardships during the Babylonian captivity that caused the Jews to fully transition from henotheism to true monotheism, outright denying that other gods even exist. The prophets kept repeating over and over that the reason the Jews were suffering so much was because they turned away from Yahweh and worshipped other gods. In reality, Israel was a tiny little kingdom whose influence was inconsequential to the larger international theater. They were surrounded by giant neighbors whose populations outnumbered them 1,000-to-1, who merely saw them as a stepping stone to get to their Egyptian enemies. That's the main reason they kept getting conquered. In the ancient Near East, countries and city-states saw their military campaigns as victories for their gods, and declared to the loser that their gods abandoned them. The Mesha Stela has written on it the oldest clear reference to Yahweh in the world. Mesha, the king of Moab, writes about a time when Israel oppressed Moab due to Moab's lack of piety to the Canaanite god Chemosh, angering him. King Mesha then describes that due to Moab's piety to their national deity Chemosh, Mesha led successful military victories against Israel and plundered the temple of Yahweh, dedicating the temple treasures to his own god Chemosh. The Hebrews were no different. They mocked other cultures' gods after every victory, which is well recorded in Hebrew scripture. Every battle that Israel won was a victory for Yahweh, and every battle Israel lost was Yahweh abandoning or punishing them for one reason or another. This mentality was the same no matter where you went at the time. Speaking of nation-states, a related point concerns the massive Israeli empire detailed in the scripture. Genesis 15, 18-21 describes the borders of the land of Israel. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Canaanites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites." This was fulfilled by King Solomon as described in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 21 and 24. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all his life. For he ruled over all the kingdoms west of the Euphrates River, from Tifsah to Gaza, and had peace on all sides. Here is a map of what that looks like. This is basically the size of the Assyrian Empire at the height of its power. All empires of this size leave massive remains and thousands of records from the lands they ruled and from surrounding kingdoms. Yet no evidence of this empire is found in archaeology digs. Instead, the records hold that, at this time, these lands were divided between 4 empires: the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, and the Babylonians. In 1069 BC, Egypt lost control of their northern lands due to Assyrian invasions on the Egyptian and Hittite empires, and the Sea Peoples invading along the coast. The area became Balkanized, and that is when the sliver-sized Israel popped up, briefly, before getting crushed and absorbed by the Assyrians on their way down to conquer Egypt. No massive Israeli empire fitting the biblical description has ever existed. In fact, it appears as though the biblical writers are appropriating the Assyrian Empire for themselves, placing Assyrian territory from the 7th century under the rulership of Solomon in the 10th century. The bulk of the history of Israel is actually spent as a vassal state to significantly larger nations, whether it was to the Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, or Romans. It wasn't the worship of foreign gods that brought the Jews low. It was the monotheistic priesthood who stirred people into rebellion that caused their foreign rulers to reassert their dominance over their vassal state. Even the Babylonian captivity was caused by this. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Israel quickly and easily, making them into a vassal state. Even though they had to pay taxes to Babylon, they still kept most of their autonomy. But it was the religious leaders of the religion of Yahweh that stirred people up to rebel. Nebuchadnezzar responded by leveling not just the temple, but all of Jerusalem to the ground, and take 25% of the Israeli population as slaves. The prophets tried to turn this around, saying that it was the Jewish tolerance of other gods that caused their rebellions to fail, rather than simple logistics of being massively outnumbered. It was only after this that the Hebrews turned away from henotheism to radical monotheism. Isaiah chapter 44 states under no uncertain terms that there is no other God besides Yahweh, and this is the first clear monotheistic reference in the Bible. Or is it? Let's take a look. Ko amar Yahweh melech Yisrael, v'golo Yahweh tzaviot, ani rishon va'ani acharon umabaladayin Elohim. So saying Yahweh, King Israel redeem, Yahweh hosts, I am first and I am last, and without is our no Elohim. So says Yahweh, King and Redeemer of Israel, and of Yahweh's hosts. I am first and I am last, and beside me, or without me, there are no gods. Umabaladai means without and beside. In is a present tense negating adverb that can be singular or plural, so this phrase can be read two ways. And beside me, there is no God, or without me, there are no gods. Both readings are valid, because this is a statement of incomparability, rather than exclusion of existence. No God is equal to Yahweh. This denial language is used elsewhere in the Bible to describe powerful empires and cities. For example, Isaiah chapter 47 talks about Babylon, using the same phrase, there is none beside me. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no more be called tender and delicate. Now therefore hear this, you who are given to pleasures, that sit securely, that says in your heart, I am, and there is none else beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. And you have been secure in your wickedness. You have said, none sees me. Your wisdom and your knowledge, it has perverted you. And you have said in your heart, I am, and there is none else beside me. This is not a statement that Babylon is the only country in the world. It's a statement that Babylon is the most powerful country in the world, and none equaled her at the time. The same thing is said for the city of Nineveh in Zephaniah 2:15. And he will stretch out his hand against the north, and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, a desolation, and dry like the wilderness. This is the joyous city that dwelt without care, and said in her heart, I am, and there is none else beside me. The claim is not that Nineveh, Babylon, or the biblical writers believe no other countries or cities exist. Rather, Babylon and Nineveh are said to be incomparable. None else beside me means none else equals me. This is crucial to understand. If these passages are interpreted as outright denying the very existence of other gods, then the council of the gods clearly described in other parts of the Bible makes no sense. Existence denial is not what is being stated. It is measure of power. As for the earlier practice of henotheism, this is a carryover from the worship of El. El was the supreme god of the ancient Canaanite religion, as in El Shaddai, El Elyon, and even Israel, which means struggled with El. Also, the Aramaic word for El is Elah, which morphed into the Arabic word Allah. In time, the worship of El declined and merged into Yahweh. To diminish the existence of the old god further, the meaning of the word El was reduced to a general reference to mean any god. All of the qualities of El are reflected in Yahweh. El had a wife named Asherah. Because Yahweh was essentially a renamed El, Yahweh inherited Asherah from El as his wife, as seen by how prevalent the worship of Asherah was among ancient Israelites, and the fact that Asherah was worshipped alongside Yahweh. The Bible references Asherah around 40 times, usually prohibiting worship of her. The translators for the King James and other versions of the Bible carefully omitted any mention of Asherah, translating her name as trees or groves. Asherah worship was much more prevalent than the worship of Baal Hadad, to whom the scriptures referred simply as Baal. Baal Zebul is an epithet of Baal Hadad, meaning Lord of High Places, or Lord of the Heavens, since he was a storm and rain god. The Jews habitually would insult the gods of other religions with wordplay, for example, calling Baal Zebul Baal Zebub, meaning Lord of Flies. Another example of this is Belial, which is usually translated as without worth, which is correct. But it is also translated as he who shall never rise, which is also correct. This is typical of Jewish humor insulting other gods with wordplay, inverting the original meaning of Lord of High Places. Belial is Baal Hadad, just as Baal Zebul and Baal Zebub is also Baal Hadad. Baal Hadad was an unruly son of El, and the venom of these insults shows that the worship of Yahweh and Baal were considered irreconcilable by the Hebrews, to the point that even civil wars were started over it. On the other hand, worship of Asherah was, by and large, accepted by the Hebrews, including most of the priesthood, though it seemed to irritate a few prophets. In the ancient Canaanite religion, which predates the Bible, El and Asherah together had 70 sons, each of whom was the progenitor and ruler of one of the nations of the earth. These 70 sons of El were called the Bene Elohim. This story was blatantly incorporated into the story of Noah after the flood. Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 through 31 gives the names of Noah and his 70 descendants that were the progenitors of all the nations of the earth. This culminates to verse 32, where it says, "These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations, in their nations, and of these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood." The 70 sons of El and Asherah, that fathered all of the nations of the earth, is identical to the later story of the 70 sons of Noah, that fathered all of the nations of the earth. This is actually supported by Deuteronomy 32:8, which says, "When the Most High, El Elyon, gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the children of men, he set the borders of the peoples according to the number of the children of Israel." But hold up, that last phrase there, children of Israel, is the Masoretic reinterpretation and is not a clean translation. The Septuagint, which is over 1,000 years older, uses a different phrase, angels of God. However, this too is interpretive. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which is even older than the Septuagint, does not use the phrase malachim, or angels. Rather, it uses the phrase Bene Elohim, sons of God. He set the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. This is one of those instances where the Jews altered the later text, drawing attention away from Yahweh's direct descendants. Scholars and rabbis also agree that Deuteronomy 32:8 is referencing the table of nations in Genesis 10, of which there are 70. 70 Beni Elohim, or sons of Yahweh, who govern the nations of humanity. 70 sons of El and Asherah, who govern the nations of humanity. Same story elements, same country of origin, but the Canaanite religion is older. Now the ancient Canaanite religion has its roots as well. El is the Canaanite rendition of the Akkadian name Il or Illu, which in turn is a rendition of the Sumerian name An or Anu. El, Illu, and Anu were considered to be the exact same being in ancient Mesopotamia, predating the Bible by more than 2,500 years. Anu was the god of the sky, who is called Lord of Hosts, and is Lord over everything else, who created the other gods. One of the interesting things about the Sumerian god Anu is the lack of any idols made for him. Idols were made for the other gods, but idols for Anu were conspicuously absent. This is reflected in the second commandment of the Bible, which prohibits the making of any idols whatsoever. These stories had an impact on many ancient world religions, not just the Canaanites and Hebrews. The stories went to Babylon, Assyria, the Hittites of what is now southern Turkey, as well as Greece and Rome. In Greece and Rome, Anu is the same as Uranus. Anu equals El equals Yahweh equals Uranus. Baal-Hadad from the Bible was the grandson of Anu. Baal-Hadad is the same as Zeus, or Jupiter. Sumer, Greece, and other areas got their stories from an earlier source, as the Sumerians described their deities using non-Sumerian names and words from an even earlier language that is now lost to time. People tend to dislike using foreign names, and sometimes rename them to something that sounds more comfortable to them, but the essential qualities remain nonetheless. More often, the names are quite similar as well, but slurred across language barriers. Ishkur, Indra, Deus, Dushara, Zeus, Jupiter, Adad, Hadad, Tashub, and Thor are all the same being. Many of the gods across world religions are remarkably similar. Even the ancients recognized the strong similarities, as seen in the 4th century BC Indo-Greek religions when Alexander the Great made his way to the Indian subcontinent. The Greeks were especially interested in Buddhism. Greco-Buddhist art depicts Hercules protecting the Buddha with thunderbolts as he ascends to enlightenment. The earliest stories and characteristics of the gods is largely the same across cultures, but later scribes would often adapt details to suit their own purposes, and culturally personalize the stories. For example, the city of Ur regarded the moon god Suwain as their patron deity. As such, he was declared the head of the pantheon, and the lineages of the other gods were adapted accordingly, making for some odd placements in the cosmos. Other well-known gods are mentioned in the Bible as well. Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess of love, is the same as Isis or Aset in Egypt, Aphrodite in Greece, and Venus to the Romans. The Bible called her Ashtaroth and the Whore of Babylon. Enki was the Sumerian god of the earth and fresh water, who created the first humans out of clay, which is the exact same story as the Greek god Prometheus. Enki, whose symbol is the serpent, also gave humans consciousness. Prometheus stole fire from Olympus and gave it to humanity, which was the fire of knowledge. But humans are mortal. They were never designed to live forever. After Enki made the first humans, he placed them within the Garden of the Gods in Eden. Eden is a Sumerian word which means flat terrain. Afterwards, the city of Eridu was built, which is a real city. In fact, it is the oldest city found on the earth thus far, dating to 5400 BC. The Kesh Temple hymn, which describes the Garden of the Gods in the Plains of Eden, was written around 2600 BC, again, thousands of years before the Bible was written. With dates like these, it becomes obvious that, in the context of ancient history, the Hebrew people are the new kids on the block. The culture, the religion, the history, they are very young. The religious community and archaeologists argue whether the oldest books of the Bible were written in the 800s, 1200s, or 1400s BC. But what about 2000 BC, 3000 BC, 5000 BC, where these stories obviously came from? The Bible is only a recent document, really. Now, we have already established that the biblical counsel of Yahweh is the same as the Canaanite counsel of El. This came from the Sumerian Anunnaki, which is also the same as the Greek council chambers of the gods on Mount Olympus. It is frequently assumed that the counsel of Yahweh is made up of angels, but the Bible neither states this nor infers this, as the Beni Elohim of the council are never called Malachim. The cherubim and seraphim that are commonly referred to as angels are in fact minor Mesopotamian deities. Temple and church doctrine outside of the scripture had given them a faceless umbrella term, messengers, probably to curb the temptation of worshiping any god besides Yahweh, and reducing the function of the council to that of simple messengers makes sense for a people on the trajectory of adopting pure monotheism. The descriptions of angels do have a throwback to earlier religions, however. Throughout the history of the ancient Near East, winged beings adorned the temples of the gods and were seen as guardians of palaces and temples. The Bible describes two types of these supernatural creatures, the cherubim and the seraphim. There is a third type that is often referenced called the living creatures, described in the book of Ezekiel, but Ezekiel later explicitly clarified that these living creatures were in fact cherubim. Most English speakers mispronounce cherubim as cherubim, simply because that's how it seems like it should sound to our language rules. Furthermore, the icons of fat little babies with wings are not cherubim. Those are called putti, or cupids. The putti were spirits of the Greek god Cupid, whose job was to spread love and desire. They only came to represent cherubim in 17th century Italian art and later. The common images of angels are humans with two wings, but these are images of Nikes and victories, which the Christian church mutated into angels. The Greek goddess Nike, who is called Victoria in Rome, was the goddess of victory. She was the daughter of Ares, god of war, and the Nikes and victories would appear on the battlefield, declaring who shall be the victor in every contest. The Bible does not describe cherubs as having an appearance resembling this. In fact, the Hebrew scriptures paint a very different image. Most passages concerning the cherubim have partial and varying descriptions, and it is from these fragments that we must assemble an image or images. 1 Kings 6, 27 and 28. And he, King Solomon, set the cherubim within the inner house. This is referring to the first temple in Jerusalem while it was being constructed. And the wings of the cherubim were stretched forth, so that the wing of the one touched the one wall, and the wing of the other cherub touched the other wall, and their wings touched one another in the middle of the house, and he overlaid the cherubim with gold. This is the most common type of description of cherubim in the Bible, though one passage in Ezekiel 41 describes a cherub as having the face of a lion. Ezekiel 41 talks about images of cherubim in the construction of the second temple after the first one was destroyed. And it was made with cherubim and palm trees, and a palm tree was between cherub and cherub, and every cherub had 2 faces, so that there was the face of a man toward the palm tree on the one side, and the face of a young lion toward the palm tree on the other side. Thus was it made through all the house round about. Since no wings are described here, it is a matter of conjecture whether cherubim always had wings or not, or for that matter, whether all cherubim had a second face, like that of a lion. In any case, divine lions and lion men, both with and without wings, some including 2 heads, are featured throughout Mesopotamian ancient religion as guardians of temples, palaces, and sacred places, centuries and millennia before they were described in the Bible. Some of the most common images of cherubim were that of the lamassu, a being with the body of a lion or bull, the face of a lion or man, bull horns, and the wings of an eagle. There are multiple combinations of man and animals, but lion, bull, man, and eagle were the most common. 2 Samuel 22:11 states, "And he, God, rode upon a cherub, and did fly. Yea, he was seen upon the wings of the wind." Psalms 18:11 says almost the exact same thing. "And he mounted upon a cherub, and did fly. Yea, he did swoop down upon the wings of the wind." What makes more sense, God mounting and riding a human-shaped creature, or God mounting and riding a winged lion, or a winged bull? Furthermore, cherub is not a Hebrew word. It is actually an Akkadian loanword, kerubu. This translates as blessed ones or holy ones. These were genies or minor deities who would stand before a deity, praying on behalf of others and delivering messages to and from the gods. These kerubu, the blessed ones, were guardians and messengers, like angels, and were seen as the children of minor gods, or were themselves minor gods. The Akkadians conceived of the kerubu 2,000 years before the oldest biblical reference to a cherub was written. The seraphim are angels whose name translates as burning ones. They had 6 wings and are mentioned only one time in the Bible, Isaiah 6:2. Above him stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he did fly. Now if we look at Israel's next-door neighbors to the north, we find the Hittites. The Hittites had minor goddesses featuring 6 wings, carved into the side of the temple of Kapara around 400 years before they were first mentioned in the Bible by Isaiah, which we know was written around 550 BC. The final type of angel described in the Bible is the living creatures, whom Ezekiel calls cherubim. These creatures are essentially a combination of the 4 most common types of cherubim found throughout the ancient Near East. Ezekiel 1:1-10. Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. And out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and every one had 4 faces, and every one of them had 4 wings, and their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. And they had the hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides, and as for the faces and wings of them 4, their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went every one straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, they had the face of a man, and they 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, and they 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and they 4 also had the face of an eagle. Ezekiel called these living creatures cherubim in Ezekiel chapter 10, verses 14, 15, and 20. And every one had 4 faces. The first face was the face of a cherub, and the second face was the face of a man, and the third the face of a lion, and the fourth the face of an eagle. And the cherubim mounted up. This is the living creature that I saw by the river Chebar. This is the living creature that I saw under the God of Israel by the river Chebar, and I knew that they were cherubim. Within Old Babylon is a place called Ishkali. There was discovered idols of a four-faced god and goddess dated between 1,100 and 1,500 years before Ezekiel was written. These four-faced deities may or may not be Ezekiel's cherubim, but it shows that beings with four faces were known to the region, and it predates the Bible by millennia. So the Bible has different descriptions of cherubim. Some have 2 wings, some have 4, some have 6, and some passages do not mention wings. Some have the face of a man, some a lion. Others have 2 faces, a man and a lion, and some have 4 faces. It's possible that the cherubim have shifting, changing forms, or simply there are different species or breeds of cherubim. For the last 1,000 to 2,000 years, the artists got it wrong. In any case, the many descriptions of the cherubim in the Bible matches the iconography of the many forms that display the appearance of the cherubim found in the significantly older Mesopotamian ancient religion. So there you have it, the roots of the Abrahamic religions in pagan lands, or at least an introduction to it. There are many, many more examples as you look deeper, like the story of Yahweh slaying the sea dragon Leviathan in Psalm 74. This is directly taken from the older Babylonian story called the Enuma Elish, which has the story of Marduk slaying the sea dragon Tiamat. Leviathan and Tiamat are the same. It's just as the Bible says in Ecclesiastes 1:9. Mashahaya ha-sheyaya, umashanasa ha-sheyasa, ve'ain kol chadash tachat ha-shemesh. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun.